Listen to this. Since March this year, the Minister of Higher Education and Training, Blade Nzimande, has sat on a forensic report that revealed, or at least raised, serious questions about the running of the National Skills Fund. Projects were given vast sums of money, almost 5 billion rand unaccounted for from the National Skills Fund, and the report has sat on his desk without any action being taken about it. And of course, Parliament's Standing Committee on Public Accounts, Scopa, has been looking into this, and they've rejected the minister's plea to keep this report secret. Mkhuleko Hlengwa is the chair of Scopa and joins us now on the line. Thank you so much for your time. I mean, it's extraordinary to me that this has been known since March this year. The Minister of Higher Education asked Scopa to keep it under wraps because he said the people implicated had not yet been given an opportunity to explain themselves. Since March?
Thank you very much, Moana. Good morning to you and the listeners. If I may just give a quick background so that the context is clarified. We met with the National Skills Fund last year as a committee, as part and parcel of looking into the audit outcomes of the various government departments and entities. We flagged the National Skills Fund and NSF, by the way, because amongst others, the Auditor General had pronounced an adverse audit outcome insofar as the National Skills Fund is concerned. In fact, it was disclaimed. And it was not the first time. And arising out of that, we realized that the inability of the AG to access information was indicative of things not going right within the entity. We then directed that the department and the National Skills Fund must conduct a forensic investigation as a matter of priority and urgency so that we can begin a process of bringing things to order within the National Skills Fund. We then advised that the report was completed and handed over to the Minister in March this year. Since then, we have been trying to pin down a meeting, and I won't go into the various instances of the difficulties we've had in that regard, but ultimately we were able to pin down a meeting for some 2 weeks ago to 3 weeks ago. Now, what happened was when the department and the minister arrived, they didn't have the report with them. They didn't submit it. They came with a presentation, which I can only classify as a summary of a summary in terms of what was in there and the roadmap in which they had intended to actually take the matter forward. We rejected that notion on the basis that, one, the investigation was at the instance of the committee, and secondly, we are unable to gauge that roadmap of implementation if we don't have sight of the report. We gave them 10 days to submit the report, and then what happened was we were scheduled to then meet with the department on Tuesday. On Tuesday morning, I then received a letter from the minister indicating that he was requesting that I and the committee invoke Rule 198 of the National Assembly rules, which would then say that the report is treated as confidential. We, of course, as a preliminary statement of state operating procedure for the committee, rejected that notion because we work on the auspices of transparency as a committee, and all our meetings are public, as you know.
Yeah.
So we then consulted with Parliament Legal in terms of whether the request for that invocation of that rule was consistent with how we should be conducting our work.
Yeah.
Yesterday, to cut a long story short, yesterday we took a decision that we are not acceding to the minister's request to treat the report as confidential, decision which I've communicated to him in writing, and that the report will be processed by the committee when Parliament resumes for the fourth quarter, because today Parliament is going into recess. So when Parliament resumes later in October, we will then process this report wherein, of course, we are now studying it and then are expecting the department to come and present the roadmap. We are inviting the SIU and the Hawks and the AG to be part and parcel of the deliberations. I hope my summary of the long-winded sequence of events makes sense in terms of how we have arrived at this point.
It absolutely does, and it brings us to speed. Of course, part of the objection of the minister was that, in fact, the people implicated in this report, particularly, of course, National Skills Funds officials, had not yet been given an opportunity to respond against the findings the report makes against them. It is now, towards the end of September. The report was completed in March. That surely cannot be a satisfactory answer.
That's precisely why we felt that the minister's request does not meet the master of Rule 198. And in fact, the POPI Act in itself indicates to us that we must not be inhibited as Parliament or as law enforcement agencies from conducting our work. And thirdly, the mere fact that the report was handed over in March, and then the minister handed it over to the DG, and that's 6 months down the line. They are still in the process of merely informing people about the fact that they are implicated is in itself problematic for a host of reasons. It means that people who are implicated have not been charged. It means that they are still at work. And it means that if we allow the kind of secrecy which is being invoked to transpire, then we are not consistent with our own identity as a committee and as Parliament. I always make the point that the operative word in Standing Committee on Public Accounts is public. And therefore, and the grave import of the National Skills Fund and the skills development of the country to meet the demands of skills expertise development and the NDP, amongst others, really compels us to get the National Skills Fund right. We must also assist the AG in this process by making sure that things are done. So we find it totally unacceptable that the report has not been processed with the kind of urgency which it should have since March.
Because, of course, one wonders what further damage has been done, but as you say, the public has a right to know. Some of what this report suggests, for example, is that monies amounting to billions of rand were paid to obscure entities without any due diligence. There was no progress monitoring of the projects that were undertaken. Invoices would be submitted without any clarity on the work or even descriptions in the work that was done, and none of those were checked by the NSF officials concerned. And of course, in classic South African corruption style, monies would be dispersed to second and third parties as soon as they were received, with no indication that actually any of the funds went into the work for which they had been dispersed.
Well, that's precisely why we are inviting all these law enforcement agencies I was referring to, and the statutory bodies like the AG, because as I indicated earlier, the investigation was triggered by the fact that the AG reported to us that they are unable to source information and therefore they are unable to make a finding, and that is why the audit outcome was disclaimed. It has always been our view that disclaimed audit outcomes are an indication of a conducive and enabling environment for corruption, and this report vindicates us in that outlook, in the fact that we also believe that there's still more that actually has to be investigated, and more will still be unearthed on top of what you've alluded to: the absence of internal controls, absence of consequence management, and inability to adhere to the PFMA, even the most basic prescripts of procurement and SCM. And so ultimately, what we need to do, of course, is then now go into those projects. The law enforcement agencies must trace the money, and the individuals who are responsible then have to be held accountable. So we are wanting to keep this matter on a short leash to ensure that there is a collaboration of law enforcement agencies, amongst others, to pool and share resources in the investigation and prosecution, so that this matter arrives at a logical legal conclusion, successful prosecution, and recoveries of money that the state would have lost, and the blacklisting of companies and individuals, which is another project we are embarking upon, working with National Treasury, because there's a revolving door in the state's machinery. People are starting companies, and the companies companies are caught to be in the wrong, they then go and start new companies. So the fact is not the company name, but the individuals behind the companies who we now need to go behind, given the ease with which people can start companies in the country.
Blacklist.
Register companies, yes.
Blacklist them and throw the full might of the law at them. Kulego Hlengwa, I appreciate your time. That's the chair, of course, of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts on that National Skills Fund report. 5 billion rand is what was unaccounted for. It's vanished, poof, gone. And the minister sat on this report since March and didn't want you to know about it.
Current events, developing stories,
tough questions.
Your voice making a difference.
This is Breakfast with Bongani Bingwa.